The town of Crimson Gulch carried a smell you couldn't wash out with rain or prayer: dust, smoke, and old blood. Folks said the desert wind itself whispered the names of the dead, drifting through warped saloon shutters and splintered church doors. On a late summer evening, when the sun bled itself out against the horizon, a stranger rode into town with eyes sharp as a hawk and a past he wouldn't name. His presence was the kind of quiet that unsettled a place already on the edge of breaking. That stranger was Elias Thorne. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and make sure you're subscribed for more incredible stories like this one. The people of Crimson Gulch hadn't seen him in over a decade. Once, he had been a deputy known for his fast hand and sharper sense of justice. But after a botched posse ride that left 3 men dead in a canyon, Elias vanished into the wilds. Some swore he'd hung up his badge forever. Others muttered he'd crossed the border and sold his soul to bandits. Now, with his black duster heavy with dust and a revolver glinting at his hip, he returned to a town he'd once sworn never to see again. The saloon doors creaked as he stepped inside. Conversation faltered, glasses paused midair, and all eyes landed on him. Crimson Gulch wasn't the kind of place to welcome back its ghosts, especially when those ghosts walked like they owned the ground beneath their boots. Elias Thorne, slurred Jonas Pike, a local drunk whose lips were always quicker than his sense. He raised his whiskey glass in mock salute. Hell must be all full up if they let you crawl back out here. Elias didn't answer. He simply crossed the room, ordered coffee from the barkeep, and sat with his back to the wall, watching, waiting. He had come for a reason, though he hadn't yet decided if he was chasing redemption or ruin. Outside, the town was restless. Crimson Gulch sat on the edge of nowhere, its gold veins long dried up and its people clinging to scraps of life. But a shadow lingered at its borders, a man whose name carried enough weight to chill even the hottest desert wind. Ronan Slate, an outlaw leader, Slate commanded men who carved their path with lead and fire. He was no ordinary bandit. He was a strategist, a predator who treated fear like currency. And rumor had it he had business in Crimson Gulch, business that would bleed the town dry if no one stood in his way. But Elias Thorne wasn't the only one with history tied to Slate. At the far end of town, in a modest homestead with curtains drawn tight against the evening, Clara Boone stood over a lantern, her hands trembling as she packed away letters she'd sworn never to read again. She was a striking woman in her early 30s, with auburn hair braided back and eyes that carried a fire sharp enough to burn. 10 years ago, she had chosen survival over loyalty, marrying into security after Elias vanished and Ronan Slate carved his bloody path through the territory. But some scars never truly healed, and Clara's heart carried both names like brands, Thorne and Slate. A knock rattled her door. She froze, clutching the lantern. For a moment, she expected Ronan himself to stride in, but when she opened it, she found Elias Thorne standing there, hat in hand, the desert's dust still clinging to his coat. "Evening, Clara," Elias said, voice low but steady. Her breath caught, not from surprise but from something deeper, old anger tangled with something more dangerous. "You've got nerve showing up here," she whispered. "After all these years." "I don't have the luxury of time," Elias replied. "Slate's coming." The name hit the air like a thunderclap. Clara stiffened, her knuckles white around the lantern handle. "You think I don't know that?" she hissed. "Half this town's already bending to him. The sheriff won't move without backup, and Slate's men are everywhere." "I didn't come to ask permission," Elias said. "I came to finish what I should have finished long ago." Clara's jaw tightened. She had once loved Elias Thorne, fiercely and foolishly, until his disappearance left her alone to fend off a world that gave no mercy. Now, with Slate looming like a storm on the horizon, the past had returned, and with it, choices she had buried deep. By midnight, word had spread across Crimson Gulch. Elias Thorne was back, and Ronan Slate's riders had been spotted just days away. Sheriff Marlowe Briggs, an aging man with weary eyes and a shotgun always within reach, sat in his office nursing black coffee and staring at the wanted posters curling on the wall. "Slate's no man to cross without an army," Briggs muttered when Elias walked in uninvited. "I'm not asking for an army," Elias said. "Just enough space to face him." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. He remembered Elias as the sharpest deputy he'd ever had, but also the one who'd abandon them when things went bad. Trust wasn't something Crimson Gulch handed out freely. Ronan Slate's got 50 men who'd slit their own mother's throat if he ordered it, Briggs warned. You stand against him, you'll be signing your death paper. Elias' eyes hardened. Then I'll sign it in blood if I have to. Meanwhile, Slate's riders were already making their mark. Out on the edge of town, fires burned where ranches once stood, and the desert echoed with gunshots. Jonas Pike, stumbling drunk through the alleys, was overheard bragging that Elias Thorne was back in town, loud enough for strangers to take note. Strangers who weren't strangers at all. They were Slate's eyes and ears. By dawn, the outlaw leader himself would know Elias was waiting. And for Crimson Gulch, that meant war was no longer coming. It was already here. If this tale of grit and vengeance grips you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. The sun rose over Crimson Gulch like a bleeding wound, throwing long red streaks across the desert sky. By dawn, whispers of Ronan Slate and his gang had spread through every cracked porch and backroom of the town. Mothers clutched their children closer, merchants packed goods into wagons, and men with shaky hands loaded rifles they hadn't touched in years. Crimson Gulch had been bracing for ruin for a long time, but now ruin had a name, and that name was riding closer with each passing hour. In the middle of the storm stood Elias Thorne, leaning against the post outside the saloon, cigarette burning between his fingers. He had the look of a man resigned, yet still dangerous, like a rattlesnake coiled too tight. His return had already unsettled the balance. Some folks prayed he'd protect them. Others cursed his presence, convinced he'd only drawn Slate's wrath quicker. And somewhere between those two tides of thought stood Clara Boone. Inside her small homestead, Clara sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the faded photograph tucked into her lap. It was old, edges curled, the image faint but unmistakable. Two men stood in the picture, one younger Elias Thorne in his deputy's badge, and beside him, Ronan Slate before he became a name feared across 3 territories. They had once been brothers in arms, riding together under a banner of law before Slate's thirst for blood turned him outlaw. Clara knew the story better than most. She had loved one man and feared the other, but both had carved their names into her life deeper than scars. Now they were on a collision course, and she was caught square in the middle. A knock at her door startled her. She opened it to find Sheriff Marlowe Briggs, his weathered face creased with suspicion. "Morning, Clara," he said, voice heavy. "I need to ask where your loyalties lie." Her stomach tightened. "What are you saying, Sheriff?" "I'm saying Ronan Slate ain't just after this town. He's after Elias. And seeing as you've got history with both, I need to know if you're going to help us stand, or if you're going to open the door when Slate comes knocking." Clara bristled. "You think I'd betray Crimson Gulch?" "I think desperation makes folks do things they swore they never would," Briggs replied. His eyes lingered on her, sharp and testing, before he tipped his hat and left her with her thoughts. But those thoughts were already poisoned, because deep down, Clara knew that if Slate asked, she couldn't promise herself she'd say no. Out in the desert, the outlaw camp stirred. Ronan Slate stood at its center, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face cut from stone and eyes that burned cold. Around him, 50 riders saddled their horses, rifles slung across their backs, dynamite strapped to saddlebags. Slate's men weren't just bandits. They were soldiers of chaos, bound by loyalty to him and him alone. One of his lieutenants, a scarred brute named Cormac, rode up. "Word is Elias Thorne's back in Crimson Gulch," he said. "The whole town's buzzing about it." Slate's jaw tightened. He turned his head slowly, the desert wind catching the edge of his black coat. "Thorne," he said, the name tasting like ash. "He should have stayed buried." "Orders?" Cormac asked. Slate's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. "We don't just take the town. We burn it. But first," he paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "we make Elias Thorne watch everything he ever cared for turn to dust. Start with Clara Boone." Back in town, Elias walked the length of Main Street, eyes sharp, hand never far from his revolver. He had seen Slate's kind before, men who thrived on fear, but Ronan was different. Ronan was personal. At the edge of the street, he found Jonas Pike, half drunk already though the day had barely begun. Jonas stumbled over his words, eager to trade gossip for coins. "You know what they're saying, Thorn?" Jonas slurred. "They say Slate doesn't just want the town's gold or the land. He wants you. Says he's gonna string you up like a scarecrow in the desert." Elias grabbed Jonas by the collar, dragging him close until their eyes locked. "If you value your tongue, Pike, you'll keep it shut when Slate's name comes up." Jonas nodded rapidly, fear sobering him in an instant. Elias released him, but the damage was already done. Slate's network of ears had caught wind of every whisper, and Jonas' big mouth had painted a target larger than ever on the town. By evening, the tension in Crimson Gulch was thick enough to choke on. The saloon buzzed with hushed voices, men debating whether to stay and fight or pack up and leave before nightfall. Elias sat alone at his table until Clara walked in. She carried herself with defiance, but her eyes betrayed unease. She sat across from him without asking. "You can't stop Slate," she said flatly. "Not alone." "I'm not asking anyone to stand beside me," Elias replied. "But if I fall, someone has to hold the line. Someone will fire enough to make him bleed before he takes everything." Clara leaned forward, her voice a whisper. "You don't understand, Elias. Slate doesn't just kill. He breaks people. He'll make you watch this town burn, and he'll make me pay for ever choosing you over him." Elias' expression hardened. "Then it ends with me. No more running. No more ghosts." For a long moment, Clara searched his face, torn between anger and something dangerously close to hope. She wanted to believe him, but she knew Slate's shadow stretched too far. That night, the first fire lit up the horizon. A ranch on the outskirts went up in flames, its owners fleeing into the dark as gunfire crackled through the desert. The town bells rang, calling men to arms, but fear spread faster than courage. Sheriff Briggs stormed into the saloon, his shotgun clutched tight. "They're testing us," he growled. "Slate's boys are close. Real close. By morning, they'll be at our doors." All eyes turned to Elias Thorn. He stood slowly, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He had been gone for years, and yet here he was, the only one with enough fire left to stand against Ronan Slate. "Then tomorrow," Elias said, voice low but steady, "we stop running." But Clara Boone didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching the horizon glow with distant fire, her heart torn apart by the weight of choices. If she warned Slate of the town's defenses, she could buy herself protection. If she stood with Elias, she risked everything. And as the desert wind howled through Crimson Gulch, Clara whispered to herself words she dared not admit aloud. "I don't know who I'll betray until the moment comes." If this tale keeps you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you're ready for the explosive finale. Morning came to Crimson Gulch under a sky the color of dried blood. The town was silent, holding its breath as if the desert itself knew what was coming. Horses stamped nervously at the hitching posts, dogs whimpered under porches, and shutters creaked closed one by one. At the center of town stood Elias Thorn, revolver holstered at his side, hat shadowing his eyes. He had faced death before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about finishing what should have ended years ago. Beside him, Sheriff Marlowe Briggs loaded shells into his shotgun with a steady rhythm. 50 against 2, Briggs muttered. "Odds don't get much uglier than that." "Better than nothing," Elias replied. His gaze swept the street, noting the empty windows where townsfolk had once promised to stand. Fear had claimed them long before Slate's riders could. The sound came then, the distant rumble of hooves, rolling across the desert like thunder. A dust cloud rose on the horizon, and within it, the black tide of Ronan Slate's gang surged forward. At the head rode Ronan Slate himself, dark coat whipping behind him, his face carved with malice. He raised a gloved hand, and the riders slowed, forming a wall of steel and leather at the edge of town. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the whinny of horses. "Elias Thorn," Slate called, his voice carrying clear across the distance. 10 years I've been waiting for this day." Elias stepped forward, unflinching. "Then let's finish it." Slate smiled coldly. "Oh, we'll finish it. But first, His eyes shifted, searching the buildings, until they landed on the figure standing near the saloon doors. Clara Boone. Elias stiffened as Slate's grin widened. Clara, he said smoothly, still caught between your ghost and your executioner. Tell me, darling, which one are you here for? The crowd of riders chuckled darkly, the sound carrying like a death knell. Clara's face paled, her hands trembling at her sides. She had spent the night tormented, torn between betrayal and defiance. And now the choice stood before her in flesh and blood. Elias turned to her, eyes sharp. Clara, don't. But Slate's gaze was hypnotic, his voice a snare. Come with me, Clara. Walk away, and I'll let this town rot in peace. Stay with him. His smile grew cruel. And you'll burn alongside it. Time seemed to stop. Clara's heart pounded, her breath shallow. 4 years, she had lived with fear clawing at her, always bending to survive. And yet, looking at Elias now, something shifted. He had returned not for himself, but to stand when no one else would. Her decision crystallized. Clara stepped closer to Elias, her chin high. You don't own me, Ronan. Not anymore. Slate's expression hardened, and his voice turned to ice. Then you've chosen death. The street erupted. Slate's riders drew their guns, a storm of bullets tearing through the air. Elias dove for cover, firing back with deadly precision. Briggs' shotgun roared, dropping 2 men before the rest scattered to flank them. The quiet town of Crimson Gulch became a battlefield. Windows shattered, horses screamed, and fire licked up from the saloon's awning where a lantern shattered in the chaos. Elias moved like a man possessed, every shot deliberate, every step purposeful. For each outlaw that fell, 3 more pushed forward. Through it all, Slate remained mounted, commanding with calm fury, his eyes never leaving Elias. Clara grabbed a rifle from behind the bar and took her place at a window. Her shots were clumsy at first, but soon they found their mark. She had lived too long under fear's weight. Today, she shed it in gunfire, but betrayal still lingered. From the back alley, Jonas Pike stumbled forward, waving frantically. Don't shoot! Don't shoot! I'm with you! He cried, running toward Slate's riders. Elias' stomach dropped. The fool had sold them out, whispering town secrets to Slate's men. And now, in the middle of a war, he pledged himself openly. Slate laughed coldly as Jonas reached his stirrup. Good dog, he said, then without hesitation, drew his pistol and put a bullet through Jonas' skull. The drunk fell lifeless into the dirt, his usefulness ended. Elias cursed under his breath. Damn coward got the death he earned. The battle raged until the street was littered with bodies, dust, and smoke. Briggs fought like a man half his age, but a bullet tore into his shoulder, knocking him down. Clara rushed to drag him to cover as Elias kept firing, buying them seconds that felt like lifetimes. Finally, Slate dismounted, stepping forward with slow, deliberate strides. The world seemed to narrow, leaving only him and Elias, 2 men bound by blood and betrayal. 10 years ago, you left me in that canyon, Slate said, his voice low and venomous. 3 men died that day because you hesitated. 3 men I swore to avenge. Elias' jaw clenched. You chose the path of blood. Don't you dare put their ghosts on me. Slate drew his revolver. Then let's see who joins them today. The duel was inevitable. The town fell silent, both sides pausing as the 2 men faced each other in the center of the street. Elias and Slate, once brothers in arms, now stood as executioner and condemned, though which depended on the outcome. Hands hovered over holsters. The world held its breath. Then, steel flashed. 2 shots cracked in the same heartbeat. Slate staggered, eyes wide with disbelief as crimson bloomed across his chest. His revolver slipped from his hand, clattering to the dirt. He tried to speak, but blood filled his throat. Slowly, he fell to his knees, then onto his face, the dust rising one last time around him. Elias stood, chest heaving, a fresh wound burning across his side where Slate's bullet had grazed. But he was alive, and Slate was not. The remaining riders, leaderless, scattered into the desert. Some were cut down by townsfolk emboldened at last, others vanished into the horizon, carrying Slate's legend into whispers of defeat. Clara rushed to Elias, her hands trembling as she pressed against his bleeding side. "You stubborn fool," she whispered, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "You should have died." Elias managed a faint smile. "Maybe I should have. But not today." Sheriff Briggs limped forward, pale but alive. He looked at Slate's body, then at Elias. "Town owes you more than it'll ever admit. But you'll never be just another man here again. You've made yourself a legend, for better or worse." Elias looked around at the burning wreckage of Crimson Gulch. The town had survived, but it was scarred, much like him. He tipped his hat low, eyes shadowed. "Legends are just ghosts waiting to be forgotten. I'll be gone by morning." Clara caught his arm. "And if I don't want you gone?" Elias paused, meeting her gaze. For a moment, the firelight danced in her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Perhaps redemption wasn't found in leaving, but in staying. But as the sun dipped low and painted the desert red, one truth remained. Blood had been spilled on the horizon, and nothing would ever be the same again. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked more stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.